we've seen Bill Haslam have to work with this legislature, a Republican, who has had his own fair share of trouble dealing with the conservative side of the legislature. How does a Democrat like yourself propose to come in and be able to work effectively with the legislature?
Well, Blake, as always, a good question. And I'll just say this, that you look at the current situation, it's highly unlikely that the legislature would change its party domination in the next election. But I would respond that I think a Democrat would be probably in the same position that Governor Haslam has been in. It will be difficult, there'd be challenges. But to me, I think the key thing is to look for common ground, to reach out to people, try to find areas that you can agree on. One of the things I have the benefit of is having served as mayor was that I was elected in a nonpartisan election. The council, which is 40 members, is elected in a nonpartisan way. Obviously, people have different political leanings, and some of those are identifiable, some of them are not. But you make the effort to reach out to folks, and you look for common ground and try to emphasize the areas of agreement. Obviously, you don't violate your core principles. You don't walk away from what you believe in. But government only works when you find areas in which everyone can agree to move forward on. And so I think one of the things in this election that the voters will be looking for is the candidate who has experience as an executive. I think they're looking for people who will be pragmatic, who will be not ideologues, people who want to get things done. That's what I think the voters are interested in, and interested in someone who will focus on the issues that actually matter to Tennesseans. So that's how I would approach it.
So I just had a quick question. I was wondering if you would weigh in on the debate that we've seen in Nashville about TBI investigations of police-involved shootings, and Director Gwynn has said that he's had a concern about being able to staff those investigations statewide. So as governor, what would you do, or what would be your thoughts on making sure those are taken care of?
Well, in terms of TBI staffing or the role that state plays in public safety, I would be a big supporter of any efforts that we can make to aid local government when it comes to public safety. And I think the TBI plays a valuable role in this state in what they provide for local district attorneys and police departments. To me, public safety has always been a core mission of government. If you look back in political history, political theory, why governments were created, they were created to protect the people from marauders, from animals, from the outside. And for a city or a state to function, for it to work as successfully as it can, you need to have a high degree of public safety and confidence in public safety and a feeling that people actually are safe. If you're going to have parks and schools and you're going to make investments in cities and states, then public safety is a big part of it. As for the discussions that are going on between the police department, the TBI, and the mayor, I'll leave that to Mayor Barry to work those issues out. I know she is working very hard to make that as transparent as she can and to bring assurance to the community that there are outside eyes looking at it. But and I am generally supportive of what she's been doing, and I don't want to weigh in on what is a local issue that I think the folks are competent to handle here.
We could politely call Tennessee tax averse. Currently, right now, the legislature has a gas tax in front of it that is that there are several, I think 81 amendments to either alter or kill it. As mayor, you had to raise taxes in certain areas. How are you going to respond to a Republican criticism that this is a big city mayor who wants to raise taxes on Tennessee?
Well, first, I don't want to raise taxes on Tennessee, and so let me be clear about that. And I would point to my record as mayor. I think in my first term, I was if not the first and only, but one of very, very few mayors who did not raise taxes in their first term. In the second term, after there was a property reappraisal, there was a tax increase, and that accompanies tax rates actually going down when the appraisal takes place. And we did that because of a variety of reasons. Number one, you gotta run the city, and you gotta make sure that you're taking care of the services that are needed by the citizens. And that tax increase was directed largely to education. One of the goals in that time period was to increase teacher pay, for us to move, I don't know where we were, somewhere in the high 20s or the low 30s statewide in terms of teacher pay, and by doing an increase in teacher pay, we moved up into the top 5. And that was, I think, an important thing for our city to do. We also embarked on a large capital spending program directed at our schools, and I think that was important to do. So I think my record is one of being a careful manager of public resources and not being one who raises taxes as a way to answer all problems. Local government is different than state government. I mean, that's a sort of a fundamental factor. But I'll refer you back to my first term. Now, during the first term, I was elected mayor and took office in September of '07, about 7 or 8 months after I was elected, totally unrelated to my election. The country went into the deepest depression it's known since the Great Recession. And we actually had one fiscal year where we had less money coming in than the year before, the first time that has happened in the history of the metropolitan government. And we made a very conscious decision, that I think was the right decision, that we weren't going to balance the books of the government by unbalancing the books of families and businesses. And we did not raise taxes during definitely the toughest economic period post-World War II. And we made very hard decisions about making cuts. We eliminated, largely through attrition, but we eliminated over 600 positions. We cut most departments, including my own, somewhere between 10 and 20%. But at the same time, we made progress on our priorities. We weren't able to add money to schools, and not as much as we wanted to public safety, but we protected those, and we continued to make investments in them. We actually added police officers, and we actually did work in schools, and then we were very aggressive during that time period, which was a low point in economic activity in the city, to work on economic development. The investments I think we made during the first term, and the convention center is obviously the biggest example, but there are others in terms of reaching out and bringing in new business to the city, paid off when the recovery began, and the recovery began earlier in Nashville. And what that did was, it positioned us throughout my second term, and I think up to this point now, where we have had expanding revenue in our city, and have not had the need for a tax increase.
To follow up here, do you support Governor Haslam's gas tax proposal?
Well, I don't know the details of the legislative negotiations. All right, so I'll answer the question this way. I support an increase in what we're doing on gas in order to pay for roads and transportation. The other option is to use the state surplus. And the state surplus is attractive to use because it maybe solves the problem for this year, but it does not solve the problem year after year after year. And you have to pay for infrastructure. Once you stop paying for infrastructure, once you start maintaining the roads the way they need to be maintained, then you're taking a big step backwards. And if you talk to people around the state, there are lots of rural communities, and I know there are interests here in Nashville too, and other major cities, about additional roads that are needed for their economic development and their prosperity. So to me, infrastructure investment is investment in the future. It's an investment in the economy, and it's something that we have a responsibility to do.
Hi, Deborah Fisher with the Tennessee Coalition for Open Government. Thanks for coming. What would you do to increase transparency in state government? There are some concerns that privatization would decrease the amount of transparency and how state government spends money. But in general, what would you do to increase transparency?
Well, to me, I think the key thing is you need to conduct business in the open. You need to, follow the open meeting laws that we follow on the local level, where, certainly open meetings are required under state law for local government, and we have, in every other locality in the state has shown that it works. I think that's important. I think it's important that the state or any other governmental entity provide the information that the media or citizens request. Privatization, there are areas about privatization that concern me. I'm sort of apprehensive about some of the proposals regarding state parks. I think that, parks to me are sort of the ultimate thing we do to aid our citizens and to preserve land long-term and to make the beauty of nature in this very beautiful state available to everyone. And so anything that would curtail the ability that we now have to offer affordable access to the outside, to these state parks, which are really given to generation. I mean, they're there for everyone for perpetuity. To me, raises a lot of questions.
So I take that that you oppose the governor's plan that he's been implementing?
Yeah, I mean, I think I need to see more details, and I think that is something that needs to be fleshed out very publicly in a long discussion about it. But my main concern is, I do not want the state to be in a position where our state parks, which are really gems, I do not want to see them become unaffordable for the people of the state. One of the problems, I believe that market forces and understanding the way the market works is a key concept. But there are certain things like state parks which are, since the beginning of the 20th century with state parks developments and national parks developments, those are for all people. And we do not want to go down a road that would curtail access to those state parks by all people. And we also need to bear in mind that those state parks play a very large role in the economies of localities around the state. And so any action taken here has to be taken with eyes wide open so that we don't hurt the economies of local governments.
Yeah, Mayor, shifting topics, how closely were you following the results last night in the special congressional election in Georgia? Do you think that the strong showing by the Democratic candidate there in a historically Republican district, do you think that shows signs maybe of a real tight election coming up in the midterm that could help you sort of a referendum on Trump?
Well, I was actually following several things closely last night, and then, as I tend to at my advanced age now, go to sleep at some point and say that the results will be there in the morning. But really,
how closely were you following it this morning?
The key thing I was following last night was the Baltimore Orioles and the New York Yankees, who both lost, and the Boston Red Sox, who won, and now are all tied for first place in the American League.
Very
East.
early then.
So that was my. But I was watching the race, and I think as it ends up now, he came in somewhere 48 or above, and there'll be a runoff.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, clearly there's an indication there that there is some voter dissatisfaction. I mean, that race was sort of transformed by national forces into some sort of referendum. No matter what happens, I think that what happened last night was a pretty powerful statement. And then you look at the results in Kansas, where a district that had been won by the President Trump by a significant margin, had been reduced to about 7% victory, indicates that there's some issues out there. We'll have to wait and see what happens in Georgia. I mean, if it's a very close election, or if the Democrats should win, I think that would say something.
But you need that to be competitive in 2018, right? You need this.
I don't need a Democratic victory in the Georgia congressional district.
Right, but you need there to be something out there on the national scale.
But I think it's happening. I don't know if you look at the last poll that I saw that struck home to me was the Middle Tennessee poll that had the president's popularity or approval in Tennessee falling somewhere into the low 50s, which was dramatically less than what he had achieved during the election itself. And then we're all familiar with his approval ratings. I mean, I want the president to succeed. We all want the country to be successful and a presidency to be successful. And I'm not banking on him having further difficulties. But midterm elections are historically, with very few exceptions, have been good for the party out of power. And it's too early to predict where we're going to be 18 months from today. I really don't know.
Thanks for being here. You're obviously very familiar with the challenges that the Metro Public Defender's Office faces from your time in that office and from your time as mayor, listening to Dawn Diener come to budget hearings and talk to you about those. The state Supreme Court has just put out this report on the challenges public defenders' offices are facing statewide. Do you have any thoughts about that report, and if you're elected as governor, what would you do to address that?
Well, I think that's a good question. I saw Dawn last night, in fact. I was a public defender for 16 years, and it's something that I think is very important for our society and the values we have as a country in terms of the way we handle trials to provide those who cannot afford defense a defense. And that we have a court system that works and that is perceived and actually is fair. Those values are important. And public defense in Tennessee has had challenges. When I was public defender, back in those days, we were funded largely through the courts. As if we were appointed to cases, Metro would get reimbursed by the state, and at one point the state ran out of money. I mean, just ran out of money to do any further reimbursements, and had lawyers working for free, and there was a lot of concern about public defender budgets and district attorney budgets at that point too. I mean, I think if you're going to have a working criminal justice system, which goes back to my belief in the importance of public safety. I mean, one of the things you learn as a public defender is how important public safety is. You have to appropriately invest in it and to support it. And so I don't have an exact plan what I would do, but I would say after 16 years I understand what the challenges are, and I would want the state to be helpful to help rectify any problems that exist.
I have a campaign question. Jeannie Najek, freelancer. So Randy Boyd spent his term basically going around the state, making job announcements, opening factories, putting out press releases saying we've brought jobs to your region. How will you translate the economic success he brought to Nashville to the rest of the state when he was basically kind of on a campaign that whole time, bringing good news to far-flung areas of the state?
Yeah, it's one of the best things about being in office is when you get to bring good news. But as mayor, you got to do a variety of jobs. Now, to me, Nashville clearly has a strong economy, and Nashville has a story of over the last 5 or 6 years where you can point to a lot of positive things that have happened here in terms of our local economy. And the fact is that there are other parts of the state. Chattanooga, for instance, I was in on Monday, is doing very, very well. Knoxville's doing well. Memphis is moving in the right direction. But there are places all around the state that aren't doing so well. I mean, I don't think you could say that every portion of Tennessee has benefited in the same degree as other portions of the state, and we're in a part that has done well. So if you go to West Tennessee, and if you talk to folks in Memphis, you get a sense that they feel a little bit left out, and they feel that they need more attention, and that they haven't received it. I don't, know the merits of that debate, but I would say this: they make a strong case that they need more. And so I think what the next governor needs to do, and what I'll talk about in this campaign in terms of my belief in economic opportunity, is that we need to really focus on the areas that have not had the same success that Nashville's had. The way I look at it, and the way I tried to look at it as mayor, is we're all part of this. It's one state. I mean, when Memphis does well, that's good for the rest of the state. When Nashville does well, that's good for the rest of the state. But our obligation, the obligations of state leaders, is to try to make for everyone to enjoy the prosperity, for everyone to have a chance to succeed. So if you go to rural counties and you see that the only job news there has been companies closing or companies moving out, or if you go there and you hear that their biggest concern is that none of their kids are returning, that there are no jobs for them in the future, then those are things that we need to address. And I work very closely with the economic development offices for Governor Bredesen. I work very closely with the economic development office with Governor Haslam, including Randy. Randy and I had a great relationship, and I regard him as a friend. But we got to focus on the areas of need. And a great example would be the mega site in West Tennessee. I mean, that sits vacant, and that is an area that I would look at as a great challenge and opportunity to try to bring something there. But what I would talk about is the need for prosperity everywhere. And what I have found on the campaign trail so far, and just in talking to people around the state, is a sense that people are happy for Nashville. They're proud of Nashville. But at the same time, they want something to happen in their communities too. And each one of these communities have their individual strengths. I mean, I've really enjoyed going up to the Upper Cumberland, and you spend time up there, and it is an incredibly beautiful place. And access to great hiking, to water activities, and it has different strengths that we need to sort of magnify and use to promote those areas. You look at a city like Cookeville, which is actually doing very well. And Cookeville's their magic is they've got technology, they've got the university, and they've got this beautiful surroundings around them that make it really a high quality of life place to be in. And that's a good model for success too.
Tennessee has declined to expand Medicaid under the ACA, and several folks like the Hospital Association, others have talked about a potential crisis within rural hospitals in Tennessee. As governor, what would you do to either bolster or increase the resources for rural health in Tennessee?
That's a great question. Number one, I think it was a mistake not to do the Medicaid expansion. And the way I look at it is this: if the federal government would come to us today, as we're having this debate about roads in Tennessee, and say, we're going to give you, $900 million for you to use to improve your roads and to make your bridges safe. And if you don't want the money, by the way, we'll give it to Oregon or we'll give it to Arizona. They want it. We would take it in a heartbeat. Basically what happened here is the federal government comes and says, we'll give you hundreds of millions of dollars to provide more care to those in need and to those most at risk. And if you don't want it, somebody else will take it, some other state, and we declined it. And I think that puts us actually in a worse position than we ever anticipated, because I don't know what's going to happen on the federal level. But if there is some changes to the Affordable Care Act, beyond the ones just sort of to fill in gaps where there's areas for improvement, if there's a movement by the federal government to go toward giving block grants to the state, then we'll start out in a bad position, because we'll receive probably less money than we're getting now, and we'll be in a position where our ability to negotiate will be less. So to me, I think you have to be a strong advocate for the rural areas and medical care. I mean, right now, the rural areas are facing hospitals that are not able to perform as well financially as they should or they would if there was Medicaid expansion. You've had hospital closure. You have parts of the state that have only one insurance company involved under the Affordable Care Act, and there's certainly the possibility that that one insurance company might go away, and so those would become sort of bare zones where there's no insurance available. So, a lot of the answers are going to have to come from the federal government, but again, you have to deal with the cards you're dealt with. And if we're dealt cards that make it difficult, I think you have to be creative. You have to look to working with all the hospitals in the state, with nonprofits, try to work out something where everybody sort of has a home hospital that they can turn to. I think the presence of rural hospitals and rural care is so key to this question about economic development. If you're running the mega site in West Tennessee, and you're looking to bring in somebody who's going to bring in 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 jobs, and you know the executives are looking at their checklist, and on the checklist is hospital, and you can't make that check. That makes it very hard to do what you need to do. I mean, these things are truly related. So, you know, my commitment would be to work hard, to be creative, to be a strong advocate for the state, and to make sure that we're doing everything we can to take care of those who need the help the most. I think that is a commitment I can make, and then we're going to have to see where we are as time goes by, because no one knows right now.
Not to bring it back to sort of the politics of everything, but I wonder, do you think it would be good for the state and for the Democratic Party to have a vibrant primary on your side of the aisle for the governor's race? I mean, is that good or bad?
Well, if you're asking me as a student of politics, I would say, sure, contested elections are always great and build party interest. If you're asking me as a candidate, you know, I'd prefer just to, you know, rock along. But you know, that's something that's totally out of my control, and you can argue it both ways from sort of the viewpoint of a campaign. I mean, certainly a primary would develop interest in what's going on in the party, would keep media attention focused on the party. You know, people have talked about the election 8 years ago when Mike McWhirter, and Mike is a fine, great guy. Mike, in the end, ended up running essentially unopposed in the Democratic primary, and you had a highly contested Republican primary, and so there was probably less attention given to that, and he had to, you know, had further to go in terms of public recognition of the campaign once the general election started. So, to me, whatever will be, to quote Doris Day, and it will, you know, if there is a primary, we'll have a hard-fought and friendly primary, and if there's not, then we'll harbor resources and be ready for what will be, under any scenario, a difficult and challenging but winnable general election.
And I may ask a follow-up just on your kind of analysis of kind of the state of the Democratic Party in Tennessee. I mean, a lot of people who held your former job don't seem to be just real involved. I wonder, you know, kind of what your analysis is, and if you think they'll be of any use to you in this race.
People who held my former job, former public defenders?
No, sorry, Purcell, Bredesen.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it is early. I mean, you know, I keep, it's 18 months to the election. And so, you know, I've been a candidate now for, I don't know, 6 weeks or whatever it's been. And we're spending a lot of time in organization. Obviously, we're working on a lot of other things, but it's not a huge public effort as of yet. And I would anticipate that involvement and interest will grow as we go on. You know, the Democratic Party obviously is in a unique position historically. There has never been a time when it has had less representation in the state government, and you know, the Republican Party is very strong. And if you look at polls, you would say this is a very difficult thing to undertake. But I think there are a lot of Democrats in the state still. But you're not going to win this election by just attracting the party base. I mean, I think you have to be cognizant of the fact that you're going to have to win independent votes, you're going to have to win moderate Republican votes, and that is the only way this election can be won. And that is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not a bad thing that you appeal to a broader base of people and you deal with the issues of how you work at the legislature by attracting a broader coalition. But I think fundamentally that has to be done in this election for a Democrat to be successful. You've got to reach across party aisles, and you've got to broaden the base because the numbers just aren't there.
looking ahead to a possible primary election against House Minority Leader Craig Fitzhugh, I mean, it seems likely that one of the biggest lines of attack against you will be your position on charter schools. And do you think your proposition on charter schools is one that resonates with the majority of Democrats right now? And talk about what your position will be on that issue in the campaign ahead.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, I haven't, I don't know, but my position would be that, look, when I look at education, which I think is the #1 issue for the state by far, I mean, I think as a state, we need to keep making progress with education. We've had 2 governors in a row, I think Governor Bredesen and Governor Haslam. Both have done very good work in education. Not everything I agree with, but they have been committed. They've put resources there, and they have made progress. But to get to where we need to be, you can't do it for 16 years and then say, we're done. This is a long-term effort, and we need to have the commitment to get it done. So to me, for education, one size doesn't fit all. I mean, I don't think that the charter schools necessarily are the answer to all the problems in urban areas. I'm not sure charter schools have any relevance at all to the rural areas. I mean, it's just simply not going to be an option that will be very available because the numbers don't work, and you have schools that are already there, and the student enrollment is not such that I think it would support that. And so to me, it's not the main issue around education. But I have been an advocate when I was mayor, and continue to be, that parents should have choices, that charter schools are public schools, and that when they work, which I think they do very well for the most part here in Nashville, some tremendous results from schools, that is something that parents should have available to them. And it's been something that's happened with success also in Memphis. But again, that isn't the corner piece of everything that I'm talking about. I think the most important issue for education right now in the state of Tennessee would be to increase teacher pay. I think one of the most important things we did as mayor was to work to increase our teachers' pay here in Davidson County, to move it up toward the top of the state from where it was in the middle. Because the key thing to make schools work is bringing in the human talent, the resources that are necessary, and teachers are absolutely essential. So I would be an advocate for us getting to the national average or above, because it makes a huge statement about our commitment to education. The way I look at it is this: I mean, we need to have all our kids be college ready. Now, a lot of kids are not going to go to college. But we ought to have available to them the technical, the special, the industrial programs, whatever, to have them be positioned to be part of a successful workforce and for them to have a successful life. But the states that are going to do well are going to be the ones that produce and attract the most college graduates. And tying this back into economic development, if you go to Memphis, if you go to West Tennessee, one of the issues, and it's not just them, I mean, it's here in Nashville too, one of the issues we've got to confront is workforce development. If you're going to continue to have a growing economy, you've got to have the folks there who can do those jobs, who the employer is comfortable hiring. And so making those investments in education, particularly in the small towns, particularly in West Tennessee, are going to have a huge positive effect on workforce development. And that is a critical issue in Memphis. I can tell you about something I saw recently. I was in Memphis and I visited the I-Zone schools, and I found that very inspiring. The I-Zone schools in Memphis are run by the Board of Education, and there is a significant participation by philanthropy in Memphis in this program, but the schools put more money. These are the low-performing schools, and they put more money into those schools. They've moved into those schools some of the best and most talented teachers, because they're serving the kids who are most at risk, which I think is a great concept. They have given the principals, and they brought in strong leaders, more autonomy. They've extended the school day by 1 hour, and they've paid their staffs more for this to happen. And they're showing real progress in terms of advancing those schools and the education of those students. That's another great model that's out there. But education to me is the deal for the state. It is the thing that will distinguish us from other states. It is the thing that will ensure our future, and it's the thing that will help us most with economic development.
And so, as education being one of your top priorities, you don't intend to be making charter schools a focus of that in any way, in terms of charter school expansion or changing our charter law in any way? Nothing on the charter side on your
No, I
message
mean,
there?
I'm not, no, I think, you know, we have good schools, here in Nashville. There are good schools in Memphis. Those decisions, you know, what happens there is up to the folks in Memphis and Nashville. But to me, I wouldn't, it's not gonna be the focus, because it doesn't encompass everybody. It doesn't bring in the rural areas, it doesn't bring in the entire state. And so to me, the focus is gonna be on increasing teacher pay, looking for creative solutions like the iZone schools, looking to build better confidence of parents in the schools, and trying to do everything that we can to make sure that every school seat in a Tennessee school, rural, urban, or otherwise, is a quality seat where kids are gonna get the education they need.
Could you speak to vouchers as part of that?
Yeah, I'm opposed to vouchers because, you know, one of the things that it's important to remember about charter schools are public schools. And vouchers would be taking money that is out of the public school system and placing that into private hands. And so that is something that I am not supportive of. The same way I have opposed and been outspoken in terms of my communications with the legislature during my time as mayor. I'm very much opposed to for-profit charter schools. I mean, that's something that I think is definitely not something we should be doing here in Tennessee, and we're not doing it, and we should continue not to do it.
Running a governor's race is an extraordinary financial commitment. You have to raise a lot of money. You're going to have to spend a lot of money. How much are you willing to commit of your own personal funds to a governor's race?
Well, you know, I'm obviously willing to invest in the campaign to support it. I haven't set a number. You know, our work right now is raising money, and we'll just see how it goes. But I'm encouraged by the results so far. I think you can raise the money, and I'm certainly not in the position financially to pay for the entire governor's race.
How much do you think a Democrat needs to raise in Tennessee in order to be competitive in the race?
Well, you hear everything from 8 to 15 million, and I think there's a lot of factors that go into it. One would be if there's a primary. Another will be, you know, who your general election opponent is and how much they raise. But if you look at the recent history of the elections, I would say it's easily somewhere between 8 and 12 is probably where you need to be, which is a lot of money.
And one more thing, given the state of the Democratic Party in Tennessee right now, any candidate's not going to have, say, the infrastructure that a governor's candidate would have had, say, 12, 16 years ago. How much of a infrastructure are you going to have to build out throughout the state in order to be competitive?
I think there's some infrastructure, and I think Mary Mancini has done a very good job as head of the party. But I think your question is, or the basis of it is accurate, that there is not the structure that existed back 8 years ago, and certainly not 12 or 16 years ago. And so one of the things that we'll do, and we're happy to do, is to build a base of support at the ground level, to reach out and develop a campaign that has a significant grassroots component to it. Because I think that, number one, it's the right thing to do, it's the right way to run a campaign, but also you have to do that. I think that's just that's the reality of this thing. I'm going into it eyes wide open, and but I do believe, let me stress, this is a very, in my mind, a a winnable race. When I made this decision to run, you know, I thought about this obviously in my waning days in the mayor's office, and then during the last year and a half when I've been teaching. And I felt I had to make 3 decisions really to get to where I'd be comfortable running. And the first one was whether I had something to offer, you know, whether I could make a difference and make a positive contribution to the state. Secondly, whether my family would want to go through this, and which they're okay with and want to. And then third, is there a path? I mean, there's a lot of ways to get exercise, but running for office is not necessarily the preferable one. And for me, there had to be a path, and I think there is a path to winning. I think that, you know, the way I look at it is this: you've got a state that is growing. You have a state that has increasing diversity. You have growth in cities. You have growth in the towns. Middle Tennessee is a dynamic area which will have a larger percent of the vote than it had in the past. We have had a tradition of alternating the governorship from party every 8 years. I concede that we've never been quite in the position we're in now, but that tradition has gone on since the 1970s. And I think the Tennesseans believe in a 2-party system. I think Tennesseans, again, will look to the governor's office and want somebody there who will talk about issues that Tennesseans care about, which is education, which is economic opportunity, which is dealing realistically and with the healthcare issue. They will look for someone who is a manager, someone who is pragmatic, and I think that's the pathway to victory.
5-minute warning.
Yeah, one more question following up on the education issues. Do you remain board chair at Project Renaissance, or is that something you're going to be?
I do until the next board meeting, which is in a week or 2.
Okay.
I'm resigning.
Okay.
This might seem like maybe a local issue, but it's a big local issue. You know, the AMP
Yeah.
and the worsening traffic situation in Middle Tennessee. As governor, how will you be better able to fund innovative transportation solutions for the growing cities?
Look, I think that the state needs to play a big role in transportation solutions in the state. And by that I mean alternative transit too. And that's part of the bill that is currently in front of the legislature. And the state's role is the following. I mean, one of the things that the federal government, if you're going to get federal funds, and you know, you need and you want for massive projects to get those federal funds, is you need state commitment, you need state resources. But I also think the key component that the next governor needs to play in terms of transit solutions for Memphis, Chattanooga, Knoxville, and Nashville is to be a leader on issues of regionalism. Middle Tennessee, when we created the Mayor's Caucus during my first term, when we invited all the mayors around here to come together and work on issues, there is huge agreement that continues to this day amongst the mayors of Middle Tennessee about what needs to be done in terms of transit. But in terms of working across county lines and creating the organizations that are necessary and the funding sources that are necessary to deal with transit, state leadership is going to have to play a key role. And I think the state has to play a genuine leadership role in that. And I would, you know, I would be more than happy to engage in that. I think it's that critical that the state is a key player in this.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Sheila Hobson, a proud liberal Democrat Tennessean. I have a question from a female perspective. Having over 16 years of human resources experience in management, I've been very concerned about the legislature as well as the governor's stance on sexual harassment complaints, especially bringing to mind the Jeremy Durham fiasco. As governor, how would you hopefully change those attitudes as well as some of the laws that have been put into place to try to put a stop to the complaints and basically just turn the other way as far as an attitude of taking sexual harassment seriously?
Well, that's a good question. I think one of the things, this kind of goes back to the question about open government that you asked, is, you know, at the local level, we in Nashville, and I think most places, and it needs to apply to all branches of government, have policies and rules and training that takes place to deal with issues of sexual harassment and other forms of employment discrimination. And those type of rules and laws and policies are followed by lots of local governments, lots of other states, and they're followed by most large businesses. It's not rocket science. And so I think what we need to do at the state level is say that we're going to follow the best policies for every branch of government that exist in both the private and the public sector. You know, it's just good governance not number one, to have people subject to that sort of treatment, which we can never allow, but you can't run an operation without making sure that you're doing all that you can to make sure it runs smoothly and that people are protected. So there are plenty of models that we can follow to get that done.
Last question, Stephen has it.
Thank you. Just real quick, the state has a long relationship with the company formerly known as CCA. That Nashville does as well.
Mm-hmm.
Before he left office, the Obama administration had announced they were going to be phasing out the federal government's use of private prisons. It looks as if the Trump administration probably has a different position on that. But if you're elected governor, is that a relationship you would like to see the state reconsider?
I think, you know, obviously the city of Nashville had a relationship with CCA for the management of facilities, a couple of facilities that well predated me as mayor. And I think what you have to do in all of those situations is evaluate them and make sure that they're running the most efficiently, the most effectively, that there's a proper oversight, and that the conditions in the facilities are appropriate. And I haven't examined that recently, but that would be, at least with the existing contracts, would be that we've got to make sure that performance is occurring as we expect.
Any closing thoughts?
No, I thank you all for being here. I mean, there's, I think, a lot of interesting issues that, you know, if we get together again, we can touch on. I think the environment's the key issue in the coming campaign. I think one of the things that maybe we haven't focused enough on is if you look at the president's budget and what's going to happen with EPA, we need to be thinking about that. Tennesseans, you know, this isn't an academic issue. It's not something that's far away somewhere else. You know, we're talking about clean air, clean water, the things that make people healthy, the things that make our state beautiful, the things that make it attractive for people to want to live here. Those are things we need to be concerned about.
Well, thank you. We can even clap. The journalists have permission to clap.